Ever find yourself thinking, wow, that person really loves themselves a little too much? Or maybe you've dated someone who at first seemed totally charming, but then, it's like every conversation always seems to find its way back to them.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We've all encountered those personalities, haven't we?
Definitely.
Well, today's deep dive, we're going right to the source.
Ah.
Getting to the bottom of what might be going on under the surface. We're diving deep, no pun intended, into this whole world of narcissistic personality disorder.
Right.
And trust me, it's way more than just, liking your own reflection a little too much.
It's way more.
So to guide us today, we've got two really great sources. We have an article from the experts over at Duke Health,
Okay.
and a really insightful YouTube video by MedCircle. So get ready to unlock like a whole new understanding of NPD.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
So first off, how do we even know if someone's like just a bit self-centered or if it's actually NPD that we're talking about?
That's a really good question because there's a huge difference.
Right.
You wouldn't believe how often people just throw that term narcissist around.
Oh, I know, right?
It's so casual, like.
Everywhere.
But the thing is, and this is what's so interesting about how the Duke Health article talks about this, there's a big difference between having some narcissistic tendencies, which, let's face it, we all do sometimes.
Of course, yeah.
And having a full-blown personality disorder. And the key here is the severity and how much these traits actually impact someone's life, and not just their life, but the lives of the people around them. That's what really matters.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not just about like checking off a few boxes on a list.
Exactly.
So then how would someone even begin to recognize if those traits are actually a problem, both for themselves or maybe for, someone they know?
Well, the Duke Health article has this really, really helpful acronym, Special Me. And it's cool because it basically breaks down all those key traits of NPD into these bite-sized pieces, which can be easier to wrap your head around.
Right, right.
For example, one of the traits is M for must be admired. And I think we all know someone who just seems to, constantly fish for compliments.
Oh, absolutely.
Always needs that validation. It's like they need a constant stream of praise and attention. You know the type.
Oh, yeah. I can picture a few people just now. So going back to that Special Me acronym, is that how a professional would actually go about diagnosing NPD?
That's such an important question. While that acronym is super helpful for, understanding the different traits, self-diagnosis is not the way to go here.
Right.
And the Duke Health article really emphasizes this. A formal diagnosis has to come from a qualified mental health professional.
Of course, yeah.
They use structured interviews, assessments. It's about really getting a clear picture of someone's behavior patterns over time.
So just like with a physical health condition, you wouldn't go to WebMD to self-diagnose. You would go to a doctor. Okay, so let's say someone's listening and some of these traits are really resonating with them and they're thinking about maybe seeking professional help. What actually causes NTD in the first place? Is it something people are born with, or is it more about their life experiences?
It's that classic nature versus nurture debate.
Right.
And it's a tricky one. What's interesting is that the Duke Health article was really clear about this. There's no single gene that causes NPD.
Oh.
It's not like you can just point to someone's DNA and say, see, right there, that's it.
Right. It's not that simple.
No, not at all. However, having said that, childhood experiences, those can definitely play a significant role.
So how does that actually play out in real life? Can you give us an example?
Absolutely. Imagine a child who grows up constantly being told they're superior to others, that they deserve special treatment, even if it means disregarding everyone else's needs. This kind of environment, you can create this, breeding ground for narcissistic traits to develop.
So it's certain behaviors end up being rewarded, which just reinforces them, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine a child who throws a tantrum and then gets whatever they wanted.
Oh, yeah.
Over time, they learn, oh, this behavior gets me results.
Yeah, it works.
Right. And then the pattern, it just becomes ingrained.
It becomes the norm.
And on the flip side, if a child tries to express their needs in a healthy way, communicates, but they're constantly ignored or dismissed, they might start to believe that being open and vulnerable just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then those behaviors, they don't get reinforced. Yeah. So it's this really fascinating interplay of nature and nurture.
Wow, yeah. So you got a pretty good understanding now of what NPD is, how it's diagnosed, some potential causes. But let's shift gears for a minute and talk about relationships.
Okay.
Because both the Duke Health article and the MedCircle video, they both really emphasize how challenging it can be to be in a relationship with NPD involved.
Oh, absolutely. And that's a really important point to highlight. It's incredibly challenging, and for everyone involved, not just, one person.
Right.
Something that really jumped out at me, especially from that MedCircle video, was how much they emphasize the impact these types of relationships can have on the partner's well-being
Yeah.
and especially their mental health.
It takes a toll.
It does. It really does. And one term that came up that I think is really relevant here is gaslighting.
Oh, yeah, gaslighting. That's a word we hear a lot, and I'm sure most people think they know what it means, but could you break it down for us? Like, what is gaslighting really?
Absolutely. It's definitely one of those words that gets thrown around a lot, but it's actually a very specific form of manipulation,
Okay.
and it's often used by people with narcissistic personality disorder. It's basically a way of making the other person doubt their own sanity,
Wow.
their memory, their reality, everything, making them question their own version of events.
It's like twisting their perception of reality. And that actually reminds me of something in the MedCircle video. They shared this really chilling anecdote, and it really stuck with me. They talked about how therapists have clients who feel like they need to record conversations
Oh, wow.
with their narcissistic partners just to have proof.
Proof of what happened.
Exactly. Just to hold on to some sense of their own reality. Because it can be that manipulative.
It's so insidious, gaslighting.
Mhm.
It makes you question everything, and that's what makes it so
It
damaging.
makes you doubt yourself constantly.
Constantly.
And it's a good reminder to be mindful of the language we use. And speaking of language, one thing I appreciated in that MedCircle video was how much that psychologist really stressed that we shouldn't just use the word narcissist so casually.
Right, like it's just a label.
Yeah, someone might be a little self-centered. It doesn't automatically make them a narcissist.
Exactly. And throwing that word around without really understanding the clinical diagnosis behind it can be really harmful.
Right. It's important to remember what we were talking about earlier, that a real diagnosis has to come from a mental health professional.
Exactly.
It's about understanding those nuances, those complexities. And you know what? Even though we're talking about some really heavy stuff, I have to say, that MedCircle video had this darkly humorous moment that I really loved. They were talking about just how difficult these relationships can be, and the psychologist actually joked about letting all the narcissists co-breed.
Yes, that was hilarious, wasn't it?
And it's funny, but it also really highlights just how challenging these relationships can be.
It really does. Because sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for yourself is just step back.
Recognize the patterns. Protect yourself.
Absolutely. Setting those boundaries is so important. Recognizing when a relationship is doing more harm than good.
Yeah.
And that takes strength.
This has been, I have to say, a really eye-opening deep dive, but I have to admit some of it is, it's pretty heavy stuff.
It can be, yeah.
So let's maybe end on a more hopeful note, huh?
Sounds good.
Is there hope for people with NPD? Can they actually, change these patterns? Duke Health article, they seemed cautiously optimistic, about recovery being possible.
Yeah, and that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's great that you're bringing up that Duke Health perspective because they make a really important point. Recovery is possible,
Okay.
but the authors are also very clear about the challenges. It's not an easy road.
Right.
It's not like, flipping a switch.
Yeah.
One of the biggest hurdles is that oftentimes people with NPD, they don't actually see their behavior as a problem.
So they might not even realize that they're the ones who need to change.
Exactly. And actually, the MedCircle video had some really good examples about this. They talk about how often people with NPD might only actually seek help when they're dealing with other stuff, like, relationships falling apart, or they're having trouble at work.
Right.
They might be struggling with anxiety or depression and not even realize that it could be connected to, this underlying NPD.
Yeah. So it's not as easy as just, deciding to change and then snapping your fingers and it's done.
Right. It takes a lot more than that.
Right.
In fact, the Duke Health article is very clear about this.
Right.
There's no magic pill. There's no one-size-fits-all therapy for NPD.
Okay. Right.
And that makes sense, right? I mean, you think about it. This is about unraveling years, maybe even decades, of these deeply ingrained patterns, these defense mechanisms that people have built up.
So it sounds like it could even be difficult for someone with NPD to even engage in therapy in the first place if they're not really open to seeing things differently.
Oh, absolutely. And both sources really highlight this.
Yeah.
Having that strong, trusting relationship with a therapist, that is crucial for any chance of real meaningful change.
Yeah.
And that in itself, building that trust,
Yeah.
that could be a huge hurdle to overcome.
Because trust and vulnerability, that's not always easy for anyone.
Right.
Especially someone with NPD. Especially, yeah, it can be really challenging. But, and this is important, even though it's tough, both Duke Health and that MedCircle video, they ultimately have this message of hope. They stress that with that willingness, from the person with NPD and the right support, positive change is possible.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
So it's more than just recognizing those harmful patterns. It's about actually choosing to do the work, even though it's really difficult.
Yeah, you've got to be willing to put in the work. And actually, the MedCircle video had a really great point about this. They said that real change with NPD, it's not about, becoming a totally different person. It's not about, erasing who you are.
Right.
It's about learning new ways to relate to yourself and to the people around you. It's about, building empathy, building self-awareness.
Which are good things for everyone.
Exactly, for all of us.
Whether you have NPD or not.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. So we covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We really did. We learned about narcissistic personality disorder. It's a complex mental health condition, whole range of traits, and yeah, it's definitely way more nuanced than just being, a little bit self-centered.
For sure.
We talked about some potential causes, what it looks like in relationships, and the possibility of recovery. It's been a really fascinating, exploration of NPD.
It has been fascinating, definitely.
And we hope this deep dive has given you, a new perspective and maybe even some things to think about as you navigate your own relationships and interactions out there in the world. Until next time.